Hi there, this video is going to talk about some of my advice for social work students as they launch their social work careers. And I recognize that a lot of this may be familiar to you or review already, but I do think some of it bears, just repeating. And I'm also going to share a few of my own experiences just as examples of, what to do or not to do. The first thing is one of the 7 habits of highly effective people, which is to begin with the end in mind. I have this image here of what road do I take? Well, where are you going? Well, I don't know. Well, then it doesn't matter. If you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. And I think this is just a good illustration of, you might change paths, certainly, and a lot of people do that. But if you don't have a goal in mind of where you want to be, you're a lot less likely to get there, at least not in an efficient and intentional way. So some advice for creating goals. You may have heard of SMART goals, which means that the goal is specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timed. And then there's also this other concept from another book I read that I'm not recalling at the moment, but it's talking about the wish, what do you want to happen? The outcome, specifically, what would that look like? What is the obstacle in your path to making that happen? And what's your plan for overcoming that? So I recommend that students do this even with learning goals within classes, and then certainly with getting a job, as well as once they're working in their job, what other goals are going to propel them to that next level of expertise and professionalism. Believing in yourself, right? So I will totally admit that sometimes I pump myself up by listening to Hercules' I Can Go the Distance. And really there's a lot of evidence that, having confidence and belief in your own abilities is really important for helping you to achieve those goals. That doesn't mean that you have this overinflated ego and don't recognize your own limitations and ways that you can improve. But having that belief and confidence in yourself is going to get you a long way. Time management is something that's also very important. So I've typically balanced a lot of different things in my life, having multiple jobs or other commitments, and people will often say, how do you get all of that stuff done? And my answer is always really time management, that it's something that I'm really intentional about trying to use my time well. So there's 1,440 minutes in a day, and you can't get those back, right? Time is a very valuable resource. And so the first thing is to get organized. You don't want to waste time trying to find something. And if you take a little bit of time up front to make sure that you're filing things away in the right place, whether in physical files or in files on your computer or things like that, that can really help you waste time moving forward. I always encourage people also to use waiting time productively. So if you know that you're going to the dentist or the mechanic or going to be taking a flight somewhere and are going to be waiting around at an airport layover, always making sure that you bring, a book or your headphones to listen to a podcast or something like that, so that you're never wasting that time. Even waiting in line at the grocery store, you might be able to answer emails or things like that. Or it doesn't necessarily need to be productive in the traditional sense. Productivity in my book is also rest and rejuvenation. That's productive as well. And so maybe that's not always, doing schoolwork or reading, but maybe it's meditating or, being intentional about reflecting, on your goals or something like that. Taking advantage of your commute. So if you drive a lot, making sure that you're, listening to podcasts or audiobooks or things like that. And thinking about, does this activity help me progress towards my goal? So once again, I'm not saying that we have to just be these machine robots that just work all the time and never spend time with our families or do anything fun, because your goals should be balanced in all aspects of your life. You should have career and educational goals, but also relationship and family goals, health goals, and whatever else that looks like for you, maybe a goal with a hobby of yours. So thinking about, does what I'm doing help me progress towards one of those goals? So thinking about things like social media, for example, is that helping you to stay connected and in touch with the people that you really care about? And is that, boosting your happiness? And if so, great. But if you're spending so much time that it's wasting time, or you're just comparing yourself to these photoshopped, images of all these, wonderful, fabulous things that your friends are doing, is that really helping you or not? And same thing with, TV. If you need that to unwind and relax a bit, sure. If that's helping you, achieve that happiness, then good. But a lot of times it's actually more of a time waster. Prioritizing and figuring out what's on the critical path, meaning what has to happen. So if you have a few different tasks going on, you really need to kind of triage and say, okay, this has to be done first, or this is the most important, so I want to make sure, I'm doing that. And having those boundaries and the ability to say no as well, and just only having time in your schedule for things that are important to you. Don't procrastinate. I always tell my students this. I know it's easier said than done for many people, but the more you're able to work ahead, your work is going to be more quality, and you'll be less likely to have stress with unexpected problems that come up. I kind of mentioned this already, but learning or rejuvenating while you're doing other things, not just waiting time, but for example, if I'm straightening my hair, I can watch a TED Talk while I'm straightening my hair, or while you're exercising, you can listen to a video lecture or cooking. And again, not saying that every single waking moment of your life has to be productive in the traditional sense. So maybe it's listening to music that really makes you happy and feel energized and excited, or music that really helps you to feel calm and rested. A little plug here for minimalism. I think oftentimes people get caught up in this American dream, right? That you need to make so much money and be able to have so much prestige in order to be happy. And I really do think that if you, as Marie Kondo says, really only care about material items that spark joy, that can help you to spend more time maybe with personal life. Or in my example, I've really prioritized spending money on experiences like travel at the expense of, maybe some things in my home. Like all of my furniture is secondhand and mismatching, and a lot of it is kind of falling apart and not the nicest. And so, if it was my priority to, whenever people came to my house, to be really impressed with my interior decorating skills, I wouldn't be able to do a lot of the things that are more important to me to be able to invest in those experiences. And then a really great resource here is the Productivity Project by Chris Bailey. I encourage you to take a look at that if this is something that is interesting to you, that you want to work on more. Making the most out of school. I can't stress enough how important it is to get involved, whether that would be in a student organization or as a research assistant or something like that. There's so much evidence that shows that the more people are involved with and connected to their campus community, the more likely they are to successfully graduate and do well. Now, I recognize that many of the folks that are listening to this video might be online students. You might be all online. You might not even live in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. But I still think that there's different ways that you can try to connect with your peers, whether that be through discussion boards or working together on group projects, reaching out to your professors, doing virtual office hours to get to know them, and just being intentional about doing whatever you can to make yourself as involved as possible. Getting relevant experience is so important. So your field placements, right, in social work are going to be possibly the primary way that you get this. And I would say, make the most that you can out of your internship. I know there are some field placements where you might be able to get away with doing schoolwork or, just kind of skating by. And I would encourage you to really avoid that and do as much as you possibly can to get as many experiences and practice as you can in your field placement. And if you have the opportunity to work somewhere else that is even remotely social work related, I'd encourage you to do that. So, when I was in college, a few of my friends were bartenders and they made so much money, and it was so tempting for me to want to bartend because, I had bills to pay and was really tempted to do something that was more lucrative. But I ended up actually working as a student worker in the campus health center in their program against domestic violence and sexual assault. And so I came out of college with 3 years of experience in health education and very social worky type things. And that still to this day, I will talk about, my experience and some of the things I learned about interpersonal violence and violence prevention and things like that. And that was even back when I was a student. And so that's really important. If, you're doing some other job that you are really not able to do something more quote unquote social worky, you can still identify transferable skills and work on building those. So, for example, I worked with refugees in one of my field placements, and some of the refugee women that I worked with had never had formal education or a job and were trying to, find work in the US and wanting to work on their resumes or cover letters. And for example, I worked with an African woman who had, I think, 8 children, and, her life really had just been about raising her children. And she was saying, I don't have any skills to bring to the job market. And I really encouraged her to think about, well, yes, you do. You know how to multitask. You know how to manage a group of people. You know leadership skills. You know how to teach. You know how to manage stress. And so there's just all these different things that you can use and point to for your experience that you can be able to demonstrate how you would apply those same skills to your social work career. Volunteering is so important. So I included a link here to an animated short message about this book, The Compound Effect by Darren Hardy. And essentially it's sort of talking about this concept of delayed gratification, and similar to what I was talking about with the bartending versus being a student worker making $7 an hour, right? That if you make short-term sacrifices in, your education or your work, it's often going to pay dividends in the long run. And I think volunteering is a great example of that. I would like to think that everybody volunteers just out of the goodness of their heart and altruism and wanting to make a difference in the community. But in addition to those, it's good for you. I think it's really good for people's mental health. But especially being social workers, really anything that you volunteer in that's related to social services at all is almost like having another job experience, and it's going to give you connections, it's going to give you references, and maybe opening doors to work in the future. So I'm going to give you a few examples here of my volunteering work and how that's helped me. I've done a lot of volunteering at a lot of different agencies, and they've all been incredibly helpful on a personal level and very meaningful and fulfilling. But here are some examples of ways that volunteering actually ended up helping me in the long run. So OASIS was the name of the relationship violence and sexual assault prevention program that I worked with at the campus health center at the University of Arizona when I was a student there. And I started out as an unpaid intern. I wasn't required to have an internship at that stage in my undergraduate career, but I knew someone who had interned there previously and had a good experience, and I was really interested in being involved in that. So I approached them to do an unpaid internship. I did that for a semester and I guess proved my worth. And they actually created a student worker position for me that I then, did for the next 3 years of my time at the university, which was incredibly valuable for me. Similarly, I served as a hospice volunteer for a couple of years, and as soon as I was graduating with my master's, the hospice company that I volunteered for approached me out of the blue and said that they would like to hire me PRN, so part-time, doing hospice work. I didn't end up accepting that opportunity. I chose a different path for my employment outside of graduation, but again, just something that I wasn't planning for or angling for, I wasn't trying to get, and just an opportunity came out of my, I guess, demonstration of skills being a volunteer. When I was a student at the University of Texas at Arlington, whoop, whoop, I served as a graduate research assistant, and that actually, again, started not as a job, but as a volunteer opportunity. I was a transfer student. I transferred in the middle of my MSW program from Arizona State University and didn't know a single person in Texas and wanted to get involved, right? And so I looked on the faculty research, the faculty page that listed all the faculty at UTA, and I selected professors who had research interests that were aligned with my interests and what I wanted to study and pursue. And I emailed a few of them basically saying like, hey, I'm new to the school. I want to get involved. I want to learn and get experience. Do you have any research projects that I can help with on a volunteer basis? And I ended up getting connected to Dr. Noelle Fields and a couple other like PhD students and other people who worked at UTA at the time, and helped them with some research regarding aging well in Arlington. It was a healthy aging research grant. It was a lot of fun and really informed the things that I was studying in school and was incredibly beneficial for me. And within a couple months of volunteering, they again offered me unsolicited. They basically said, your contributions are worth paying for, and they found money to hire me as a research assistant, which then got me in-state tuition, which was really helpful. So, and actually then continuing on, once I was working full-time at the senior source after I graduated, I continued to collaborate with Dr. Fields and a few other people from the university and did research work with them, did some publications, and used data from my practice. And continuing to have that connection with the school is part of what then led me to apply to become an adjunct instructor and then eventually a full-time faculty member here as well. So I sometimes think back about what if I had never, taken that initiative to reach out and volunteer doing research, and would I have felt so connected to the community when I was there, and would I even have gone down this path of doing research and publications and eventually teaching, which I love. The final example here is at the Senior Source. It's a great agency in Dallas where I worked for 4 years. And again, I started as a volunteer. So because of transferring from ASU to UTA, not all my credits transferred over, and I wasn't able to finish in 2 years. I had to add like a summer semester. So I graduated in August, but I was done my field placement in May. So, and I was working as a research assistant, but I wasn't working outside of the school and wanted to get some more relevant experience before I applied for jobs in August. So I knew of the Senior Source, knew it was a great agency, and I reached out basically saying like, hey, can I create my own unpaid, like informal internship? I want to just work 1 day a week and get some more experience and things like that. So I did that. I worked in their caregiver support program 1 day a week. And again, I think partly because I was able to demonstrate my, contribution to the agency as well as making connections with people there. I think that was a big contributing factor in me being offered a full-time position when I graduated. So I share all that not to brag or anything like that. I know many of you probably have similar experiences and things that you can share, but I just share that as like, it's not just one fluke thing. I have at least 4 different examples of times where I was, proactive in wanting to create a learning experience for me, and that was helpful for me not only in the learning, but also in opening doors for me in the future as well. And I would encourage you to try and do the same thing. interpersonal skills is so important. I want everyone to, avoid gossip or things like that and just stay out of drama in their work careers, engaging in mentoring, finding a mentor, and as well as eventually finding someone that you can mentor as well. There's this book called The Ego is the Enemy by Ryan Holiday, and he talks about you need to find your plus, your minus, and your equal. Your plus being someone who's more advanced in their career that you can look up to, your minus being someone who's less advanced that you can mentor, and your equal and a peer. And so having at least one of each of those categories that you have a close quality relationship with. Another really great classic book is How to Win Friends and Influence People. If you haven't read it, I highly encourage you to. One of the things he says is that when you're wrong, admit it emphatically and, apologize sincerely. And another classic technique from this book is he calls it give them the worm. So he says something along the lines of like, I love cake, but if I go fishing, I'm not going to put cake on the end of my lure, because that's not what the fish want. The fish want the worm. And so not always assuming that everybody has the same motivations or values or needs that you do, but rather trying to give them the worm, give them what they want. And the famous author and speaker, Zig Ziglar, he says, you can have everything you want in life if you just help enough other people get what they want. And I think that's so true, that as we build up and help and support other people, we get, things in return. So for example, I'm a very visual learner. I like to have graphics and, notes and things like that. But I recognize that not all of my students are that way. If I'm a student, if I could just have someone lecture the entire time and give me good quality information, I would be so happy with that. But I know that that's not the case for all my students, right? So in my in-person classes, I do a lot more experiential, activities for more kinesthetic learners. And I make sure to do these audio lectures, right? Because if it were me, I would just need the PowerPoint and not even the lecture video. But I know that not everyone is like me, and so I'm giving the worm, so to speak, to my students to make sure they also have the auditory component along with that. And so that's an example of that. And then finally, the 5 love languages. This is a classic relationship book. If you are not familiar with that, I highly, highly recommend reading it and finding out about it. It's basically talking about how there's 5 different ways that people express and receive affection and love. They are words of affirmation, physical touch, acts of service, quality time, and gifts. And usually it's in a romantic context, but you can actually apply some of these at work or in school settings as well. So of course, be careful with the physical touch one, right? I don't want anyone like being in trouble for sexual harassment or something like that. But so for example, again, in my in-person classes, I always start the very first day of class standing at the door, and I give every single student a handshake when they come in, right? I'm not like hugging or groping them. That would be inappropriate. But in a culturally appropriate context, having that physical connection. I want to make sure I have quality time with my students. So in an online setting, that means, sending frequent emails or announcements, having these lectures where students can sort of get to know me a little bit as well, and having that quality time for my students is helpful. Words of affirmation, right? Giving constructive feedback, but also positive feedback on grades and assignments. And so I just give some of these examples that you can employ also in the work setting, knowing that if you have people that you're supervising, that maybe for some of them, a word of affirmation about a job well done is really meaningful to them. And for some of them, maybe quality time of having an open door policy is more important to them. Maybe some of them need, small gifts of appreciation. And so just recognizing and kind of assessing for that as well. I think it is so important to cultivate gratitude in your life, not only to increase your own life satisfaction and happiness, but also to give credit where credit is due and help to build up and lift up other people in your life. Know Thyself. One of my favorite books is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, and it talks about basically finding a purpose in life. And I think it's really important to know what that, that purpose is driving you, whether that's spiritual or career-based, or maybe, in terms of raising your family or whatever that is. Knowing about your personality type as well. Another book that I really recommend is Quiet by Susan Cain. It talks about introverts and that a lot of ways our culture is sort of geared more towards extroverts. And so this is an excellent book if you identify as being more introverted, or if someone important to you in your life is introverted. I think it's really important. The Myers-Briggs type indicator, that's the one with the 4 letters. So like ENFJ or INTP or whatever you are. That's a good one that I recommend, as well as the Enneagram. So looking at, what are the different personality types? You usually have one, like dominant one, and then like a side one. So it does it in numbers. I think it's 1 through 8 or 1 through 7. And so knowing kind of what your Enneagram types are and how you connect with other Enneagram styles, I think is very important as well. So for example, I don't remember the numbers, but they have names too. So my dominant one is called Achiever, and my second one is Helper. And so it makes sense that I'm in this career, right? I'm wanting to, pursue excellence in my teaching as much as possible. And of course, helping other people. But there's other ones, like a lot of other, different types. So I would encourage you to look at that. Being aware of your own life experiences and biases as well. And I really recommend therapy for everybody. There's no stigma in that in my book. And knowing that a lot of people who go into social work do so because they had some kind of personal experience. Maybe they were involved in the social services system as a child. Maybe they had a certain trauma and they had to go to therapy to heal themselves for that, or were touched by substance abuse, or whatever that is. Everybody, is fighting, everyone you meet is fighting their own battle, is a quote that I like. But I think particularly in social work, there's this concept of the wounded warrior that many of us have overcome, or are struggling with things from our own life or past that have inspired and motivated us to go into social work. And so recommending, that you work through those issues if that's the case for you, so that you're in a healthy place, that you're not going to always be triggered, and you're able to help other people effectively. A really great resource here is the book Feeling Good by David Burns. It's a cognitive behavioral therapy classic book, and there's a handbook, like a workbook, that goes along with it as well, and I highly recommend that as well. And then asking for feedback, having this growth mindset. There's another book where it's talking about mindset of, do you have a growth mindset where you're always just trying to improve, or do you have a fixed mindset where this is my level of intelligence and there's nothing I can do to fix that? And really seeing feedback as like a gas gauge, right? If I fill up gas in my car because I'm flashing empty, that doesn't mean that my car is bad or defective. It just means that it needed a little bit more resources. And I think that's the same if we get a low grade on a test or a poor review on our performance evaluation or whatever that is. And then finally, hire your weaknesses. Sarah Blakely is the creator of Spanx. You may have seen her on Shark Tank. And she says it's important to hire your weaknesses. So when you're in a position of leadership, being able to work on and improve on your weaknesses, but also recognize when you need to maybe delegate tasks or lean on someone who maybe has more administrative skills than you, or more creativity than you, or whatever that is. Thinking about what's your dream job. So if money and image were no object, what would you do? If you won the lottery, what would you do? So my answer to this question was always, I would just be a student forever, right? Like, I loved school. I was a good student. If I won the lottery, there's so many things I'm interested in studying and learning about, and I would just get more degrees. That's not practical from a financial standpoint, right? But being a professor is a really good substitute for that, because I'm in an academic setting. I get to learn and, be in kind of that classroom setting and engage with students, and I really enjoy that. There's another great book. You're going to have like a library of suggestions at the end of this one, but Flow is another classic positive psychology book by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. I think that's how you pronounce it. And it talks about basically being in an activity where you're really focused and you get immediate feedback and time goes by really fast. So classic examples are playing a musical instrument or rock climbing or other things like that. But you can get flow on the job as well. I get into flow when I'm doing lectures, and I'm very engaged in that. And so those are some things to think about. There's also this idea of the AEIOU of careers. So what are the things that you like and thrive in as far as activities, environment, interactions with people, any objects that you use, and who the end users are? So think about all of those categories and what type of environment, are you working behind a desk or are you out in the field, doing home visits? Who are you interacting with? Is it children or adults, and etc. Also thinking about populations versus roles. So do you want to be working in direct practice, or would you rather be a supervisor or administrator? And do you want to work, with homeless individuals or people in nursing homes? You can also simulate through volunteering, right? I'm going back to my volunteering soapbox, but it's a really great low-stakes way to sort of try out a job or career and see whether you like it or not. Same thing with your field placement, right? So when I was starting my graduate degree, my goal was to work with refugee populations. And that didn't end up being what I was doing because I did a lot of volunteering with refugees and a lot of work in my internship, and I loved it. But I personally found that in Arizona anyway, the refugee job market was fairly small. There were not a lot of opportunities. And the jobs that did become available almost always went to someone who was from the country where the refugees were coming from, who was a native speaker of, Somali or whatever it was. And so I had some other interests like health and aging and mental health that I thought would give me better job prospects and opportunities. And I wouldn't have learned that without kind of testing it out first. Doing informational interviews. So you can ask someone to bribe them to go to lunch or something, buy them a coffee or whatever, and just ask them questions about how they got to be in the place that they are and what advice they have for you. And another book that I would recommend about this is by Cal Newport. It's So Good They Can't Ignore You. And the main message here is, what can you offer that is both rare and valuable? So what skills, knowledge, or experience can you cultivate that would make you rare and valuable and important in that job market? Okay, in terms of finding a job, it's really important to tailor your resume for each specific job. Sometimes when you submit a resume to a large company, it just goes through a machine, basically, like a software program that looks for keywords. So you don't want to just have this one set resume, but rather make sure that you're highlighting the skills or experiences that job description is looking for. You want to secure several references ahead of time, network, research the organization. So my first job out of college was with the American Cancer Society. And when I found out I had an interview, I did a lot of research about the organization ahead of time. And through my research online, I actually found they have this website that has these online training modules for new volunteers and staff, and I went ahead and did them before I even interviewed. And it was so helpful because it helped me learn about the agency and whether I would be a good fit, and also kind of gave me an idea of what the culture is and what they expect of their employees and volunteers. And I was so much more prepared to answer questions like, what would you do in this situation? Because I kind of already knew what they were looking for. In job interviews, you want to prepare examples that illustrate your strengths. So think about a time when you fill in the blank, resolved a conflict or met a, deadline or things like that. And then having a plan for addressing your weaknesses. So maybe you're not the most organized person on the planet, but You could say, sometimes I have trouble with, prioritizing my deadlines or whatever, but here's what I'm doing. I have this calendar and I'm working on this new system with reminders on my Outlook or whatever that is, so that you can be aware of your weaknesses, but also have a plan that you can share with others for what you're doing to improve on that. And then another book recommendation is Getting from College to Career by Lindsay Polak. In terms of professional development, I highly, highly recommend that everybody in social work get licensed. I have a whole other video about licensing. It talks a little bit about why, so I won't go into that in detail. Dressing for the job that you want and not the job that you have. Having, good email communication tips, so saying, hi, so-and-so, and being, having a signature line and things like that. Being mindful about your social media and, how what you post on social media might be perceived by other, professionals in your field, or if a client were ever to stumble upon that. Joining professional organizations like the NASW, public speaking. So I did Toastmasters for a couple years and I found it extremely helpful. It's a professional development in public speaking and leadership organization. They have clubs all over the country and all over the Metroplex here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area that gives you experience with speaking in public and communicating and getting feedback on that. Using the Writing Resource Center while you're still a student, as well as career services, is also incredibly important in helping with your writing. Oh, I have an example here. I worked a job fair at one point when I was working with the Senior Source. It was a job fair for older adults. And someone came to the job fair, I'm not joking, wearing these exact pants. And it just sort of blew my mind. And I think it's sort of expected that people know how to dress professionally, but you would be surprised. And so just being mindful of that. Lifelong learning is so important. There's research out there showing that having a higher cognitive reserve is a protective factor against developing dementia. So basically, the more neuronal connections we have, the more we know. That can be from formal education or learning a second language, or just other things that are going to stimulate and challenge your mind. That's really good for our mental health. Using TV to watch documentaries or other things that will be helpful. Reading, as you can see, I'm a reader and often read things that I find to be very helpful for me and my students. You can subscribe to different YouTube channels and videos like Crash Course Psychology or the Khan Academy or the Productivity Game are some that I recommend. And there's the Social Work Podcast and a whole variety of other podcasts you can use to expand your learning as well. And finally, self-care is so important. You want to make sure that you're sustainable. And I included this image here to show the importance of, in a symbolic way, putting on your own oxygen first before assisting other passengers, right? And you hear that in airplanes, but it's true. You need to take care of yourself if you're going to be able to be fully effective for your colleagues and your clients. So having a healthy diet, research shows that something that is rich in green leafy vegetables and very plant-based with, low sugar and low fat and low processed food is good for your physical and mental health. Exercising is incredibly important. There's studies that show that vigorous aerobic exercise can be just as effective as antidepressant medications in dealing with mild depression. Mindfulness, I'm a huge believer in mindfulness and meditation to help, quiet the mind and reset. Having social support is incredibly important. There's a TED Talk out there that talks about the quality of your social network being the number one factor that impacts happiness. Spirituality can be really important. Having a sense of humor, having time for rest. I mentioned flow before, having those flow activities both at work and in your personal life. And then finally, making the right decisions. When you're thinking about your career, I know that some students can get a little bit overwhelmed and daunted about, should I do this or that? Should I take this class or that class, or do this field placement or that? And unless it's something that is violating your ethics or morals, there really are not right and wrong decisions. There are right and left decisions. So think about it that way. Not am I making the right or the wrong decision, but am I just going right or going left? And hopefully that'll take a little bit of pressure off of you in making those decisions. So in summary, you're off to great places. Today is your day. Your mountain is waiting, so get on your way. Good luck.